So earlier this week, I posted a video on why I believe all hybrid holsters are awful. And so today I thought we would do a little bit more positive spin and talk about what a holster has to have and what makes a holster better and what makes a holster worse. And then that way you can use that in buying an effective holster. And to do that, I have brought out the box of shame. The box of shame is a box filled with a whole bunch of crappy holsters. Now, I would like to say that this is a bunch of crappy holsters that have been donated to me, but oh no. Most of these crappy holsters, in fact, I think all of them, I'll verify if one doesn't, all of the crappy ones for sure, are ones that I spent my hard earned money on. Lessons that I learned the hard way are not good for us and not good for me and not good for you. And so, as an instructor, I see these on the range all the time. I see them in people's lives, and I have made those mistakes. So we're going to dig some holsters out of the box of shame to show you what makes a good holster and what makes a bad holster. First, we have to talk about what makes a holster acceptable versus unacceptable. I'm not talking about good versus not so good. I'm not talking about high quality versus not high quality. I'm talking about usable versus crap, okay? Usable versus not usable. And then I'll show you some examples of things that pass as holsters that are not holsters. A holster, if you were going to use it, has to have three things, okay? Three items. Now, I've boiled these down from Kathy Jackson, the Cornered Cat. She puts this out in a 4-part series. I'll link that in the description. But a holster has to do three things. Number one, it has to cover the trigger guard completely. It has to completely cover the trigger guard. Notice I said the word completely. Number one, it has to cover the trigger guard completely. Number two, it has to hold the firearm securely. It has to keep that firearm where you want it. And number three, it has to allow access to your firearm reliably. So it has to have all three of those things. Number one, cover the trigger guard completely. Number two, hold the firearm securely. And number three, allow access to the firearm reliably. If it does those three things, then it is an acceptable holster. Now, of course, when we're talking about holsters, we're not talking about cases. When we talk about holsters, we're talking about on body. Something that is not on body, I don't consider a holster, I consider a case. So even if it is, say, off body and it's in a car, environment, you're like, oh, I have a holster in my car. I consider that a case. Holsters keep firearms on your person. Otherwise, it is cased if it is not on your person, but it is in something that covers the trigger guard completely, holds it securely, allows access to it reliably and quickly, then you have a case instead of a holster. Okay, let's look at some things that fail at being holsters. They are purported as holsters, they're sold as holsters, but they're not. Let's dig in to the box of shame. And the first thing we're going to come out of the box of shame with is for this Bursa Thunder 380, which my wife carried for a time. And this holster is, I'm not picking on the manufacturer just because it is what it is. This particular one's made by Galco, and this is the ultimate Second Amendment. It's a concealable, tuckable holster. Okay, so we verified that this gun is clear. It's still pointed in a safe direction. We drop that slide. We still don't point guns at ourselves, so we're very careful. Now, what happens here, even if I drop that on there and I put this in there nice and tight, okay, so it's in there nice and tight. Now let's look. Do you see why this fails? It automatically fails. You know why it fails? Because it does not cover the trigger guard completely. So it automatically fails from that perspective. It is also made out of soft leather. And so I can, again, I'll just triple verify it here with you. I'll verify that we don't have any round in the chamber. We don't have a magazine in the gun. We're still going to keep the gun pointed in a safe direction, all right? So I can reach in here, even with this gun in the holster completely, and I can pull the trigger all the way to the rear. It's got a magazine disconnect, so it's not going to do anything, but I can get into the trigger and pull it all the way to the rear. Ipso facto, it fails as a holster. This is not a holster. Now, next thing that this holster, again, what we can't do, doesn't hold the firearm securely. And I have a fairly simple test for if it holds a firearm securely. Again, not on my person or anything like that. I just hold that firearm and I don't grip it around the holster itself, because again, it's the holster that I want to be able to hold it securely, not necessarily pressure on the holster, okay? Because you don't know where pressure is going to come from. You might not have pressure in that moment. Your belt buckle might fail or whatever, and I still want the trigger guard to stay fully covered, and I want the gun to stay secure in its holster so I don't have problems. Okay, so if I hold it lightly and I give it a little bit of a shake, this guy comes out. You notice that took two, okay, but at that second one it comes out. So it fails the second one as well. Now I can make the third one. If I had this guy in an appendix position or whatever, then I could get in here, get a hand on it, and get it out and do what I needed it to do. But since it fails the first two, it is not covering the trigger guard completely. It does not hold the firearm securely. It therefore fails as a holster. So let's take another walk into the box of shame, and I will show you two shames that I have. First of all, this is a Taurus TCP, which isn't a bad gun. This little guy has actually fired reliably for me, but it has a problem in the trigger that I'm not going to cover in this particular video that makes it completely unacceptable as a gun that I would depend my life on. And I carried this guy, again to my chagrin and to my shame, in your old-fashioned Uncle Mike's pocket crappy holster. And you can see how much wear this thing has on it, which tells you I wore it quite a bit. Learn from my derp, okay? So again, this is not just a bad choice. This is not just a suboptimal choice. This is a failure, and I failed this failure for a long time. I'm not telling you how bad you are. I'm telling you how bad I've been, okay? Because again, I put this in this little sock that I have, and is the trigger guard fully covered? Yes, it is. It is fully covered. However, if I don't pinch this sucker and hold it, then guess what? I don't even have to shake it and the gun comes right out. So this thing utterly fails. The second thing is I can actually get a hold of the trigger, and you can't see because I'd have a hard time moving it all the way, but I could do it this way. I can keep the gun completely in the holster, get in here, and she pulls no problem. So ta-da, I have two problems with this holster as well, in that I can get inside the trigger guard, no problem, and the gun does not say secure, so that is a fail as a holster. Back into the box of shame, looking for an acceptable pocket holster. This little particular guy is an acceptable pocket holster. It's very minimalist. It's a Kydex holster. Leather you could make it out of as well, but what happens here is gun snaps in, and again, trigger guard completely covered. Can't do anything out of it. Gun does not come out, even if I'm trying not to hold it where I'm holding it together at all. This one is adjustable retention so that you can get enough hold on it that it holds the gun securely, and you can get to the gun and get it out of the holster when it's out of your pocket. That thing grabs in there. This is an acceptable holster. Let's take another trip into the box of shame to see some more fail. This is a generic inside the waistband holster that is bin sized for a Glock pistol. So I could put a Glock pistol. This particular one is my airsoft Glock. So I put this Glock pistol in there, and its design, it's fairly new, right? So it's got, you can hear it. Hear the creaky of new leather, right? But number one, if I come around to this side, you see, I can get crap inside that trigger guard. It's not completely covered. And when I give it a shake, second shake, out she comes. And again, I didn't shake it hard, so it's not like I'm really getting after it. On this particular one, what you're seeing here is the gun can come right out of it with just a little shake, and that is a problem. So this fails as a holster. Next fail as a holster is, again, this is a Galco King Tuck. And again, I hate hybrid holsters. Hybrid holsters are horrible for them almost completely always. And again, why? Because I can get, now it's hard to get in on the Kydex side, but you have two sides to this holster. I can reach right in here. I can get the trigger. I can make it go off. This has not covered the trigger guard completely, so it is not acceptable from that capacity. The other part here, I just give it a tiniest little shake and out she comes. Now somebody might say, well, wait a minute, John, I put it, and I've had a couple of these comments. Well, I put it on my body, and it's the pressure of the belt that keeps it in there. That makes it a fail. The holster itself needs to do that. That's what makes a holster good, is that God forbid something were to go wrong. Like for instance, I'm just going to say you go to the bathroom, for instance, and you drop trow and you go, oh, okay, I undid my belt. Well, now the gun can come flying out. You don't want that. You want that gun to stay exactly where it is if you have to go. Now, you might say, well, I never go to the bathroom in public. Okay, maybe you're that guy, but I'm telling you, when emergencies happen, you need to go to the stinking bathroom. You need to be able to keep that gun securely still on its place on your belt without losing it. This fails from that arena, just that simple, and it comes out, so it fails from those arenas. Though again, because this one's cut with the right sweat shield, I can get a full firing grip on it, so it doesn't fail from that perspective. Still fail as a holster. Back into the box of shame we go for another fail that we have actually turned into at least something marginally acceptable. Marginally acceptable, and that is a belly band, okay? So we see this belly band for Big Eye John. And this is the classic one for my Glock 43. This is my Hermia, and you can see she's been stippled just for me and all that stuff. Had some work done on her. Wonder Glock, right? Now, normally speaking, these are fail. And the reason that these are fail is, again, our three things. We have to have the trigger guard completely covered. We have to have the gun held securely, and we have to be able to access the gun reliably. So if I'm very careful with my fingers and I don't put my hand in front of the gun, all that stuff, and I put this guy down in here, and he happened to be on me, this belly band. So then I say, okay, is the trigger guard completely covered? Well, so I can get it in there, and you go, all right, so there it is. So it's totally inside the trigger guard, except for I can actually get my finger on the trigger and pull it no problem. You might have heard it go off there. So therefore, it is not securely covering the trigger guard. Now let's think about I'm going to call that almost pass on that, but it does shake its way out pretty quick. But I can turn this into an actual victory. I can turn it into an acceptable holster by a little bit of Kydex and a MIC holster, which is a trigger guard holster for this Glock 43. So it covers the trigger guard. That by itself can be an acceptable holster, a minimalist holster. So then sticking it inside of the belly band, let's see if I do that again without pointing the gun at myself, hopefully. So now, if I stick that in there real well, and then I were to put this on, now it is completely covered the trigger guard. It is much more secure in that, and even if that comes off, the gun itself is still connected to the band. It can't fly out, and I can access it and get this MIC off there and go to work with it. So this can work, but by itself, belly band fail. Addition of a MIC starts to get to be an acceptable holster. Okay, now into the box of shame we go, but not really for shame at this point. Now we can start working on holsters that actually work for all of their intended purposes. We still have Hermia on my Glock 43, and now we're starting to get into holsters that are a little bit better. Now we can talk about better versus worse all the time, but this particular holster I do use, and I use that. It's got an ulti clip on it, so I use this without a belt on. When I don't have a belt, I use this guy. So again, you can see here, again, an unloaded gun. We're still gonna be safe, not pointed at our hand. Clicks right in there. It's not crazy retention on this particular one, but you can adjust that retention via the screws if you want. Again, holds things securely, okay? So not huge. It will come out eventually if I shake the living daylights out of it, but it's much better, and it will hold the gun. And notice, if I turn it over here, you can see the trigger guard is completely covered. I cannot get in there to this thing without removing it from the holster. That makes this an acceptable holster. Back into the box of shame for another one for my Glock 43. Again, we're back with Hermia, and this one is an appendix carry belted. I love soft loops myself. I'm not talking about better versus acceptable, but in this instance, again, snaps into place, holds it securely. You can see the trigger guard is completely covered. Ipso facto, acceptable holster. Doesn't fall out. God forbid, my belt drops trowel or my clips fall off or whatever, and the gun goes flying off me. It stays in the holster. Acceptable holster. Okay, back into the box as well for a holster that I don't wear every day anymore, but I do like this holster. Again, we're going to move up to a bigger gun here. This is a VP9. This is my training version of my everyday carry gun, but this is an actual gun that I put a training barrel in so that it is inert. And this holster will work just fine. Again, does everything that a holster needs to do. So when I put it in there, let's note the trigger guard completely covered. When the gun is off me, the gun won't come out. Now, if I really give this guy a heck of a shake, it wouldn't even there. But if I really give it a good shake, it will eventually come out because these are friction retention holsters, but it does the things that it needs to do. Perfectly acceptable holster. And I did use this for quite some time as my daily carry holster. Back into the box, back with the VP9. We have another holster here. This is my current everyday carry holster. Again, snap the gun in place. It's got a real positive retention in it. You notice the trigger is completely covered. I cannot get inside the trigger guard in any capacity with this. The gun is held securely in place, does not come out, and I can access the gun reliably. Acceptable holster. Back into the box of shame for an outside the waistband holster. This particular one made for me with the ASP logo on it. I thought that was pretty cool. And again, snaps into place reliably. Again, I'm not really jerking it super duper hard, but again, if this gun fell or whatever, it's not coming out of the holster, and I recognize just barely, man, but this trigger guard is completely covered. I cannot in any capacity get my finger inside there. Acceptable holster. Okay, back into the box for some external outside the waistband and paddle holsters. One fail and one succeed. Let's look at first the fail. This is a Fobus paddle holster. I told you this was the walk of shame for me in my box of shame, right? So we're going to use this airsoft Glock again. Now listen, it really is hard to get in there, and I get a good solid snap. So this guy's not coming out for nothing. So it passes that. I can get a decent grip on the gun. However, if you notice, the trigger guard is not completely covered. Now you might go, but John, this is so little in here. That's true, but I want trigger guard completely covered. I don't want anything to get inside there. So this guy does not pass the test. It does not completely cover the trigger guard. There are better choices. Back into the box for another holster design. This particular one, the Safariland ALS. Again, I put the gun in the bucket. Now the click there means there's nothing I'm gonna do. I can do the hokey pokey, turn myself around with this. It's not coming out unless I press the button, then it can come out just fine. And again, if I go and look, this guy, the holster completely covers the trigger guard. I cannot get inside here in any capacity. That makes this a success. Now, some people hate the paddle. I get that. I'm not talking about good versus better. I'm simply talking about acceptable holster, Safariland ALS. Next, back into the box of shame, I want to show you with a pistol-mounted light, in this case, a TLR1HL on my VP9, the difference between light-bearing holsters, because again, covering the trigger guard completely, very important. This particular one was made for me. It actually looks really cool, right? Looks like Han Solo's blaster, which is pretty nifty. So when I put the gun in the bucket is the problem. Here I am left-handed, so let me get this in here. And you can see there's a challenge right there. It doesn't like to get in there. But when we get that sucker in there, what I want you to see is, can you see here? Watch this. I can actually get my finger inside here, and if I'm not careful, I can get my finger all the way in there. I just heard it a little bit ago to try to do it, but I could feel the trigger right there, so I get my finger all the way in there and actually pull the trigger. This does not work because there's too much space inside there. Finally, we are going to look at one from the box of shame that does not do that. Same type of holster. Again, this particular one for an appendix carry of the same gun, VP9 with a TLR1. And let's look, the gun comes in there, again, stays in there nice and secure. And this particular one, see the style here? You cannot get anything in there. A finger will not fit in there. Nothing will fit in there. So this is an acceptable holster. You could easily put stuff on this and able to put it on you on the waist or wherever. And so this is an acceptable holster. One final thing, we've talked about 3 things that can get us a particularly reliable holster. Number 1, covers the trigger guard completely. Number 2, holds the firearm securely. And number 3, allows you to withdraw the firearm reliably. And the only thing that I would think about here is you do see sometimes the hybrid holsters with this big sweat shield that doesn't allow you to get a full firing grip on the gun. It must allow you to get a full firing grip on the gun in the holster. So the only problem that I see sometimes with holsters like this Kydex holster, especially appendix, is I see people wear it so low that it sits right down on their belt that they can't get their fingers on it. Or occasionally I have seen, especially with ladies holsters, in particular, I just see this with ladies all the time. They can't get their middle finger all the way up under. So I see ladies draw with this 2-finger grip thing where they go down, get the 2 fingers. Then as the gun starts to come out, they get a 3rd finger. No. Full firing grip on the gun has to do that. So that means sometimes here you have to adjust the ride height of the holster. You have to adjust where it is so that it is sitting in a spot where I can get my full firing grip on the gun with my gun hand, my dominant hand, get the gun out and in the fight. That's what a holster needs in order to be an acceptable holster. Another day we'll talk about what makes a holster better versus worse, but make sure that your holster is at least an acceptable holster via those 3 tests.